welcome back to the Arcane Forge. My name's Josh, and today I just wanted to talk about what you actually need to get started in Dungeons & Dragons, if that's the game you've chosen to play. So the best part is, really good news, not much at all, basically. One of the best things about Dungeons & Dragons is that it's largely free, as is the case with a lot of tabletop pen and paper role-playing games. What you almost certainly need are the rules, how do you play, that kind of stuff, and those come in 3 books. The 3 books are the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. They basically serve totally different functions, and they are for totally different people. 2 of those books are for one person, and the other book is for the rest of the group. In D&D, if you've amassed a party, a group of people who want to play, you also need one person who's called the Dungeon Master, also known as DM, GM, Game Master sometimes, the Storyteller. It varies from person to person. It might be what they've heard or what they've played in other games, what they're comfortable with, but generally speaking, you have a DM and you have players. Technically everyone's playing the game, but the majority of people start off as players, in which case you're going to be the people who are going through an adventure. You're going to be the people who are experiencing a story. You're going to invent a character of your own and you're going to play through that story. The Player's Handbook is full of information for those people. And basically, what it has in it is, how do I make this character that I'm going to be playing through the story as? It has things like, what kind of species you might want to be, because you might not just be a human, you might be an elf or a dwarf or a halfling, a kind of hobbit creature, or some of the more exotic species that are exclusive to Dungeons & Dragons and not really found in many other places in sort of fantasy literature. It'll also have information on what class you want to play, and although you can be absolutely anything you can imagine, the classes exist to show you how you might operate and function in combat. It also has things in there about, how much money your character might have to start off with, what kind of equipment they might start off with. It has some kind of sample backgrounds, which give you some benefits and some drawbacks based on how your character might have lived beforehand. Things like were they a street urchin before they decided to take up the mantle of an adventurer and go through this story? Or were they maybe a local hero? Or maybe they're really skilled in a certain craft and they're known all throughout their hometown as the guy you go to make armor or something like that, Just a little bit of extra flavour to kind of get your character started. It also gives you the basics of the rules here and there, like how to attack, how to cast a spell, what your stats mean, all this kind of stuff when you're rolling up a character sheet, because there need to be numbers to kind of verify what you think you can do. What skills you might have, whether you're really good at, let's say, climbing a mountain, but you might be really terrible at writing a book. All of that is in there, really, really in-depth stuff, without being over the top. The Dungeon Master's Guide has stuff for the other player, the single person, outside of the group. So the Dungeon Master's job is, in my opinion, the best one. Okay, so you get all these people who are coming up with all their characters and thinking about how they might fit in and what they're going to do when they start playing. But the Dungeon Master actually creates the whole world, the whole universe that these people are going to be playing in. You can obviously use some pre-generated ones, which are found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or you can use some pre-generated adventures, but otherwise their job is to come up with an adventure, come up with puzzles and traps and fights and stories that your players are going to be playing through. Now, everything doesn't always go to plan when you're a DM. You might come up with this brilliant story, you might come up with this character that your players find. It's known as a non-player character or an NPC. You make this one NPC that you fall in love with and you think they're brilliant. They're going to guide your party through this entire massive adventure. Maybe they're all drinking in a tavern and this old man walks up to them and hands them an ancient scroll, and the old man is actually one of their long-lost fathers, and you have this whole character arc all planned out, but it turns out that the rogue of your party is just a murder hobo and decides to shank him in the face. What the hell do you do? That is hours of writing down the drain because you couldn't predict what one of your players would do. Oh no. Oh wait, okay? This is exactly what the Dungeon Master's Guide is for. The Dungeon Master's Guide has everything you need to, for starters, build your own world. It comes up with all the extravagant rules, all the what the hell do I do now moments. It has difficulty levels. How difficult should traps be? What do I do in this situation? What do I do in that situation? Suggestions for stuff that you might not think about when you're coming up with an area, a scenario, a city. You know, you might think, I'm making a medieval city here. There's cobbled streets on the floor. But the Dungeon Master's Guide suggests things like, okay, what events are going on right now? Is it the anniversary of a nearby tavern that everybody knows and loves? Are there adventurers coming back that your party will see who are really famous and rich now and they might be a little bit jealous of? What does it smell like? You know, are there festering sewers? Is it smoggy? Is it raining right now? Check the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it has suggestions on all that kind of stuff. Extra bits of flavour that in the heat of the moment, when you're really in-depth in your story, you might not think of all the time. I use it all the time because I forget sometimes. I get so wrapped up in the big open world that sometimes I need something to remind me, oh yeah, it's been about 2 months since my party started their adventure. It should probably be about winter time now. So this city that I've written in is suddenly not just a random city, it's a absolutely snow-blanketed city with everyone dressed in bear pelts because they're freezing. But also it has rules for how much gold your party should earn every time they go out in a mission, or if they fight something, how much they should get for that. Roughly how much experience they should be gaining from fight to fight or from encounter to encounter. Alternative rules, things like if you want to put your setting in a kind of steampunk is my personal favourite, or like a sci-fi setting, things like that. What items they might find, how certain things might change here and there. It's really useful thinking of like what kind of gods there might be in this world. Are they real or are they just worshipped? But the Dungeon Master's Guide is a really comprehensive book that will teach you the fundamentals of what you put your party through. The third book is also for the Dungeon Master, and it's called the Monster Manual, and it's like a huge bestiary. It is so much fun. It's one of the most fun books. Basically, eventually, your party are going to run into some monsters, or maybe they're just going to start a tavern brawl and you suddenly need to think, oh god, how tough is that guy that they just threw that chair at? If you look in the Monster Manual, it'll give you stats, just like the players will roll for themselves, and it'll show you how difficult they are to defeat, what kind of attacks they might use on their turn when it comes to their time to attack, how much gold and what items they might have in their pockets, what spells they might know. But it's super, super cheap, because if you only need 3 books, and let's say you're playing in a group of about 4 or 5 people, everybody could just chip in and you get 1 of each book. You don't have to, you might want to have 1 each, who knows. But if you wanted to keep it really cheap, you can find them online and just everybody chips in. The next super important thing that you're going to need are character sheets, because the players all need to have a set of stats, that indicate how they might interact with the world. Now, the player's handbook tells you what those stats are, how to roll them up and all this kind of stuff, and in the back it has character sheets with little spots allocated for all the individual stats. I'm going to do a totally different video on how to roll up a character, is the phrase for when you invent a character and create kind of what they physically mean in the world, what their stats are. But for now, all you need to know is that you need one of those, and they are found in the back of the Player's Handbook. You can also download those as well from the Wizards of the Coast website. Now, the books that I've showed you are for 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. There have been loads and loads of editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and we're on our 5th one. It's personally my favourite, so that's why I'm kind of showing you these. It's also the newest. But if you want to play a different edition, or if you're joining a group, always make sure to check what edition that they might be playing, because they might prefer it. Each edition seems to have a different bit of flavour, a different feeling to it. Okay? I personally prefer 5th edition, these books, because for me, being a previous player of 1st and 4th edition, it seems to marry those two in a way that I feel is really comfortable. It's really simple to get your head around. It's got a lot of cinematic moments to it, but it's not over the top. It has all the detail and intricacy of 1st edition while having a lot more simplicity. So it's way easier to get your head around. In my opinion, it's the best role-playing system out there. Now next up, you're going to need some dice. Dice are basically used to incorporate the kind of randomness that life seems to have. When you're going through an adventure, you might not always succeed at something, you might not always fail at something, but there's always kind of a chance. And your stats that you rolled up for your character sheet indicate how good or bad you might be at something. So you usually take some of those numbers and add them to a dice roll. Now these aren't the 6-sided dice that you might be used to in other games. These are going to be various different sizes. The most notable one is the D20, a 20-sided dice. We use that terminology a lot. The shorthand D and then however many sides that it can go up to. You'll find that absolutely everywhere. The D20, 20-sided dice, is the main dice that you're going to be using. If in doubt, roll a D20. The rest of the dice are used for a lot of different things, but mostly for the damage that you inflict when you use a weapon. So a D20 might tell you whether or not you hit a creature, but you then have a sword in your hand, and how much damage does that do when it hits someone? But the dice that you'll need in general, other than the D20, are the D12, the D10, the D8, the D6, and the D4. You might actually need 2 different D10s in case your Dungeon Master ever asks you to roll what's called percentile dice, or a D100, in which case one of them will act as the tens number and one of them will act as the units number. Now Chessex are a great provider of dice in that form, and I'll put a link down below where you can get some of them, because they come in loads of different colours and shapes and sizes. You'll end up finding that possibly you're maybe a bit of a collector. For me, it's become a total addiction to collect dice. But let's say you don't want to spend any money on any dice, you could instead download a dice app if you have a smartphone. I use those regularly if I'm rolling way too many dice than I owe, or sometimes you've forgotten your dice, in which case if you go on your smartphone, you can download a lot of different dice rolling apps that sometimes have a 3D element to them, so that it actually feels and looks like you're rolling dice tracked in the screen, but sometimes it can just be a random number generator. So personally, I use something called Great Dice D&D, but there are literally hundreds of them out there. They're usually free. There might be some that have adverts and stuff like that you might want to pay for instead, but who knows? There are loads of them out there, okay? So you do not have to pay for dice, but you will need them. You're probably going to need a table and some friends. I can't believe it's taken me this long to say that. But Dungeons & Dragons is not the kind of game that you can play solo. You can play a solo adventure with like one other person, if you're the DM or if they're the DM. D&D has in mind that you're going to be playing with about 3 to 5 people. You can obviously go way larger than that. You can have a whole bunch of people playing at once, but things might take a really long time to do. A table's fairly essential because you want somewhere to put all your books and to gather round. You might want some snacks and stuff like that on there. Who knows? It's your table, it's your rules, but generally sort of gathering around and all facing each other seems to be a really nice way to play the game. Now the other name, other than a role-playing game that we call Dungeons & Dragons, is a pen and paper game. So naturally you're going to need a pen and some paper. You might only just use this to start off with to write your character sheet and so on and so forth. But it's a really good idea to keep a bit of scrap paper nearby so you can write stuff down as you go. Your DM is going to be constantly telling you a huge story. They're going to have, non-player characters, all these story characters that you're going to meet constantly, and you might go back to the village and have a conversation with them, and you'll realise you've totally forgotten their name or what you were doing here. It happens to all of us. You forget something really vital, and if you just made a note of it at the time, you can recall it. So having a little bit of paper next to you is always a good thing. You can also do like some little sketches and things like that of what you think the monsters might look like that you're fighting. You can try and draw maps of intricate dungeons and puzzles as you go that your DM is describing to you, but it might not want, the DM might want you to get lost in this maze. But if you think, I'm going to walk 20 feet forwards and then draw 20 feet of little footsteps up ahead, and then I'm going to turn right and I'm going to walk that way for 30 feet. You can write it on your bit of scratch paper next to you, and then suddenly you're actually making a map. Now there are a load of optional extras as well. You might want a game mat, and that's basically a wipe away board that you can unroll and unravel and put on your table. The game mat has little squares on it which indicate 5 feet each depending on your scale, and it's really useful for combat encounters or for intricate dungeons that your players can kind of have a bird's eye view through. But in terms of combat, when you get into it, you might find that you want to use one of these game mats to indicate where everything is and where all the players are standing, because there's no arguments and disagreements. There could be, the ranger might fire an arrow and the sorcerer might fly into the air, and the DM suddenly goes, you can't fly into the air because the ceiling's really low, and actually the monster's right in front of you. You can't fire a bow right at his face when he's right there. And you go, I had no idea about that. You didn't say anything about that. And the DM is like, sorry, it was in my mind, but I'm sorry I didn't describe it. But if you draw it all out on one of these mats, or you use some dungeon tiles that you either purchase or make yourself, then there can't really be any disagreements about that. If you're going down the route of using game mat or using dungeon tiles, something like that, to indicate the layout, you may also want miniatures. And miniatures are great. I am totally obsessed with miniatures. I love miniature painting and assembly and all this kind of stuff. I'm a huge advocate, just because I love all that kind of stuff. I've been playing a lot of tabletop war games and stuff like that during my life, and so it seems natural for me to get them. You don't have to. I've played campaigns where we use like bottle caps to indicate who everybody is, and dice to indicate what the monsters are and things like that. But you can use miniatures, and they add a lot of impact, a lot of gravity to the game. Certainly, if you design your own one that represents each of the characters in the party, you can get really attached to them, and they have their own stories here and there. A really good resource if you wanted to design your own miniature that represents your character and get it 3D printed and sent to your door is to use heroforge.com. Now, they're not sponsoring me. God, I wish they were, because I give them a lot of business. But I'll link them down below. They're a great service. There's kind of an inexpensive option if you just want the miniature. There's a slightly more expensive option if you want to be able to paint it and things like that. But they're great. I spend hours on their website just designing different characters that I might one day possibly 3D print. Soundtracks are so much fun. Okay, so you've already added this 3D element of having an actual map on the ground of where your people are fighting. You have miniatures. Again, you don't have to have any of this, but you have miniatures, all this kind of stuff, and nothing will add to it more than a soundtrack or some ambient music, some ambient sounds. Okay, so you can go online and find an ambient sound mixer. Again, I'm going to put some links in the description. And basically that can sound like, waves are crashing up against the side of the cave mouth that you're in, dripping cave. There can be like town noises, all this kind of stuff. But soundtracks can be really atmospheric as well. I use Spotify a lot and make a lot of playlists of, what I think elven harp music might sound like, or, orcish drum music, or that kind of stuff, just for a bit of ambience to have playing quietly in the background while your players talk or fight over the top of it. Another totally optional thing is the DM screen. If your DM hasn't bought enough stuff already, they can get this screen, and basically it does two things. It's really good at adding some mystique to the game, because you can place this in front of where the DM sits, and everybody can see their face, but they can't see what dice they roll, and they can't see what their notes are, what surprises and twists and turns are in the story. So it's all still a mystery, it's all still happening. There's no spoilers, basically. But also on the other side of it, on the back of it, are all these notes that you might find useful in a pinch. Okay, so there's things like the names of NPCs, to randomly roll if you suddenly encounter someone you weren't expecting to, and you have to frantically come up with what name they might have, what motivations they might have. Maybe they're in love with someone, or maybe they are, maybe their brother has just been murdered and they're out for revenge. There's little tables for that kind of stuff, as well as commonly used rules, like what status conditions might be, what exhaustion feels like and how that might affect your players. So it's a nice little wall to keep a gap between the players and the DM. So there's still some mystery and some intrigue, but also providing a lot of last-second answers for the DM. Thanks so much for sticking around. Again, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to grab us on any of our social media. Links are down below or in the comment section beneath this video.